the modern era started with the Enlightenment, right? Which again was a movement that started on the basis that we need to, or we're better off rejecting all claims to the supernatural, divine revelation. We don't need that for progress, right? We have better tools now in our hands, right? With science now flourishing. And so philosophers started questioning not just certain church doctrines, but the church itself, right? They thought that, so reason and science would inevitably lead to progress. So before that, the objective truths, as they were, they came from God. People thought they came from God. God has revealed himself and he has told us about the subjective truth that exists. But then here, they thought, let's not look at any sort of divine revelation. Let's find the subjective truth ourselves with our rationality and the scientific method. And the goal was to free humanity from superstition, found a civilization on rational inquiry, empirical evidence, and scientific discovery. So, yeah. And so this should say, does believe. So the modern era believes that there is objective truth, right? So we're still on the field that objective truth is there. We're just going to find it. The knowledge, the truth, transcends culture. We just don't believe that things are true because, we were brought up in a certain culture. Sure, some things are true for us because we grew up in a certain culture, like driving on the left side of the street or the right side of the street. But there are things that were objectively true. And the scientific study defines the limits of knowledge. So this started as three things, mainly. These three principles were the foundations of the whole modern era. So people believe they were rationalistic. We can begin from ourselves and we can formulate absolutes. We can begin with ourselves and formulate absolutes. Number two, people believed that their reason was justified. So the reason, they didn't need to appeal to anything to justify the reason. They saw that the reason was justified. And finally, they were searching for a unified field of knowledge. Now, what that means is they're looking for something, and that something, on the most fundamental level, would be able to explain all of reality. In the previous era, that was God, right? God explains everything. And they were looking for something similar, a unified field of knowledge, right? That would explain all of reality. And then science sort of changed a little bit. So we started with early modern science, with people still believing in God. But now we're at modern science as well. So this is Schaefer, he's doing this distinction. People started to think that our universe is now a closed system, right? Because we reject anything outside the universe is all there is. It's a closed system. If there are gaps in our knowledge, they're going to be filled by science in the future. So if there's some things that we don't know, we're going to know them eventually, right? But then there was the dreadful discoveries, if you want to call it that all the significance and purpose that people would get from God was lost. So people doing their science in a closed system started to realize things like man is nothing but an evolved animal. Man is nothing but a machine. This is when people started to say, well, what is free will? Do we really have free will? And so the significance and purpose do not exist anymore, at least in an objective sense, right? I mean, I can always say, yeah, there's something that makes meaning for me, but there's no such thing as absolute significance or purpose. And then we start going from the modern era to postmodernism. So postmodernism, again, was a philosophical movement, and it started with the idea that, okay, we've been searching for this unified field of knowledge for so long now. We've failed to do that on a lot of fields of knowledge, and therefore, maybe there isn't such a thing. Maybe there is no unified field of knowledge at all, right? So there began this idea that we can use our rationality, our scientific method. It all leads to pessimism. It all leads to man being a machine, man being nothing but an evolved animal, and so on. But then this caused a problem for people because they didn't really want that. They wanted more. And so they saw non-rational beliefs as, being optimistic. So this separation there, this blue line between the two, it meant that these two were not really comparable. They were two different things. And they acted for different goals, right? And so faith started to emerge. Now, faith, I don't mean faith in the early church sense. I mean, this is how they defined faith. Their faith became irrational, unjustified, unwarranted, and unreasonable. There was a huge gap between the faith and the rationality. The rationality that was pessimistic, sure. Faith was unjustifiable, but it was what we need to get out of bed in the morning. It's what we need to believe to keep functioning. And faith also doesn't mean that it was only people who believed in God that had faith. Also people who were secular also had some kind of faith. And there were a lot of philosophers that were postmodernists. They had some sort of faith in something that's called the final experience. The final experience is something that you would feel when you're on a cruise in the middle of the ocean, for example. This feeling that you really can't explain, but it's the sort of thing that, yes, there is hope, there is meaning, right? You can't justify it, you can't really explain it, but it's what people looked after, like the final experience. And so we get to Kierkegaard. Kierkegaard was one of the postmodernist philosophers, and he was a Christian. But again, his faith was very different from his rationality. So in his writings, he says things like, to have faith is to lose your mind and to win God. Faith sees best in the dark. That's exactly what they needed. It was unjustified, but it was built that way. They didn't want to justify it. And so the general postmodern era now, it gave up the hope of looking for objective truth. There are some things that you might believe, but it's not objectively true. I believe things that work for me, you believe things that work for you, we're all happy. Right? And there was also religious pluralism. So with all the different systems of thought around religion, and with all of them trying to make absolute claims to truth, these things were rejected. So if you're claiming absolute truth, you just get out. What are you saying? Right? There's no such thing. And because this movement happened mostly in the West, and the West was mostly Christian, there was a lot of rejection of Christianity, and this generated interest in non-Christian systems of thought, like Hinduism or Buddhism and the like. So these things were once dismissed as being superstitious, but so these systems of thought you would believe them because they resonated with you, or because you felt the connection to them, right? They weren't justified, and so they work really well in this kind of culture now that doesn't believe in absolute claims. And especially today, with all the amplification of technology and the internet, and all the different information you can find on the internet, this doesn't help the case that there isn't absolute truth. There are a lot of claims, there are a lot of opinions on all the different things, Therefore, who's to say there's one thing that's just absolutely true? And so, this is the picture now. So, first, people believe that there is objective truth. It comes from God, who is there and who has spoken to us. And then, in the 19th century, in the modern era, people still believed in objective truth, but they saw that it came from rationality and the scientific method. And then, the 20th century is when we get into postmodernism, which is, truth is subjective. There's no such thing as absolute truth. So this is, it's called The Parable of the Madman. This was written by Friedrich Nietzsche. He was a German philosopher. He was, in a sense, the first of postmodernists. So he despised Christianity, and he wrote this. Now this is just an excerpt, this is not the entire thing. It's a bit long, so just bear with me, but I'll just read all of this. The madman jumped into their midst and pierced them with his eyes. "Where is God?" he cried. "I will tell you, we have killed him, you and I. All of us are his murderers. But how did we do this? How could we drink up the sea? Who gave us the sponge to wipe away the entire horizon? What were we doing when we unchained this earth from the sun? Whether is it moving now? Whether are we moving away from all suns? Are we not plunging continually, backward, sideward, forward, in all directions? Is there still any up or down left? Are we not straying as through an infinite nothing? Do we not feel the breath of empty space? Has it not become colder? Is not night continually closing in on us? Do we not need to light lanterns in the morning? Do we hear nothing as yet of the noise of the grave diggers who are burying God? Do we smell nothing as yet of the divine composition? God's too decomposed, God is dead. God remains dead. We have killed him." And those were the last words I imagined myself saying at church. But see, Nietzsche was a postmodernist. You can see in his language that he absolutely understood the consequences of rejecting an absolute point of reference. Right? Has it not become colder? Must we not light lanterns in the morning? Everything becomes relative. We don't know what is up or down anymore. And now I'm going to take it.
Thank you, Mina. Okay, so thanks to Mina, now we have a good idea of what postmodernism is, where it came about, how it developed. So I want to take you through a day in the life of a postmodernist. So, science. How would a postmodernist conduct science? So we can say that science is based on the scientific method. Okay? This is based on modernism and rationality. So how would a postmodernist reconcile this? So the universal law of nature, physics, however you'd like to put it, is a universal law for things like gravity. So what would they say? So the question really now becomes, does science require that there are... Sorry, over here. Does science require that there are truths that are objective? So, the common answer that through our research we came to find was that a postmodernist could reply with saying, objective knowledge is impossible. Our ideas cannot correspond to the external reality. Now what is this? Let's tease out what he's kind of saying here. He's saying that our knowledge or our subjective experience of reality is just that, it's subjective. So there's a beautiful book called The Truth Decay, and I'm going to read you just a little quote from it. So Douglas is asking, a postmodernist, when I asked him if the law of gravity would be true if nobody on Earth, if there were no one on Earth, the postmodernist replied, no, truth is limited to our language. So we define gravity, postmodernists say we define gravity by giving it that label as gravity. And if there were no humans on Earth to define it as gravity, gravity wouldn't exist, is the position that they would try to hold. Now, I'm not saying I agree with it, but it's what we found that they'd like to say. So, next thing, healthcare. How would postmodernists tackle healthcare? I know this is a bit sideways, but I want you to put in your minds, you have a headache, you know, thinking, oh, could really go for some medication, some of that chemical thing that fixes me up, and I have in one hand Panadol, and in the other hand rat poison. And from a postmodern perspective, it really wouldn't matter which one I ate. It's just, you know, what's true for you can be true for you, what's true for me can be true for me. Which whenever I take, it's kind of rat poison for me. It's the truth that, you know, my headache will go away. So, just leave you with that. Engineering. Now, this is a very interesting building. I have the name of it, but you can ask me after I've lost from my memory. But this building was designed to be like a postmodernist building. It was designed to represent postmodernist values. You see, if you look very carefully, there are stairs that lead nowhere. There are pillars that hold up nothing. The whole building is designed to be pointless. It's called the Wexner Center for Performing Arts. Now, Ravi Zacharias, he went and toured this building, and I have a really interesting dialogue to read for you guys. So he said, this is America's first postmodern building. I was startled for a moment, and I said, what is a postmodern building? He said, well, the architect said that he designed this building with no design in mind. When the architect was asked why, he said, if life itself is meaningless, why should our buildings have any design? Aren't they also meaningless? So he has pillars that have no purpose. He has stairways that go nowhere. He has a senseless building built on somebody. He has a senseless building built and somebody's just paid for it. I replied, so his argument was that if life has no purpose, the design, why should the building have any design? He said, that's correct. So Ravi Zacharias replied, did he do the same thing with the foundation? Postmodernism and engineering. Ethics and morality. Now this is a big one. What would a postmodernist take on morality be? The most common postmodernist response would be moral relativism. Now let's get into moral relativism. Moral relativism would say action X is right if the local culture deems it as appropriate or approves. And action X is wrong if the local culture disapproves. Now this is really good for the postmodernist because it shows that moral values aren't centered on anything except a social construct, different and varies from location to location. So here I have a quote, morality differs in every society, and this is a convenient term for socially approved habits. Now, the evidence for moral relativism, because like you can have an idea, but what's the point if you don't have any evidence? So the idea is moral is a social construct. The evidence is individual cultures differ in their beliefs and opinions, therefore there is no absolute truth. What people regard as true is indicative of their cultural surroundings. As Mina said, left and right side of the roads, you find all examples of one culture being different than another. It's also got to do with your upbringing. How your parents raised you will give you different moral standards than somebody else, right? So, in that sense, yeah, they seem to have a point here. So, to consolidate this idea, formally, the argument would go, there are many moral codes, therefore, there is no one correct moral code. Yeah. There is a problem, however. The problem of progress. Now, what do I mean by the problem of progress? We said, formally, there are many moral codes. Therefore, there is no one correct moral code. Now, there is an assumption that they're making there, and I've highlighted in red, because it's really important. They assume that all moral codes are equal. Okay? So, if they're assuming that all moral codes are equal, it means that you can't have any moral progress. We can't say things like, Hitler's idea of a moral society was no more or less moral than our current 21st century Australian society. Yeah? If I'm losing anyone, please let me know. Things like women's rights, abolishment of slavery, racial discrimination, etc. All these things, we can't attribute them to anything because all moral codes are equal by thing. There are many moral codes, therefore no one moral code is correct. To assume that is assume that all moral codes are equal. We have not progressed. So, slight problem there. Okay, so we started a day in the life of the postmodernist. At the end of the day, what do all these examples kind of give us? Can being a postmodernist in all faculties of life be attainable? You can be a postmodernist in philosophy or in hierarchy and thinking and whatever, but really when it gets down to your day-to-day life, in all areas, is this worldview consistent across all areas of your life? Is this worldview practical? So truth. Yeah. The postmodern view of truth. Truth is relative. Truth depends on cultures, opinions, and belief, and there is no absolute truth. So, the question is, there is no truth. That's really the crux of postmodernism. So, let's take that sentence. There is no truth. The question becomes, is that statement true? So, yes or no answer. So, let's go through yes. Let's say, it's the truth that there is no truth. Yeah. It's the truth that there's no truth. So, we can say, sure, that's your opinion, or we can say, that kind of doesn't make sense. If there's no truth, how can that be the truth? Am I losing anyone? Or you've got no, in case, is this statement true that there's no truth? No. Then, there goes postmodernism down. Sorry? Both answers lead to the same conclusion that there is no truth is not true. So, it's self-defeating, it's self-refuting, it doesn't stand up on its own two legs. So, we start kind of down this journey, and we kind of end back where we start. The traditional view of truth. Traditional view of truth is what corresponds to reality, the oldest, most common sense view of truth. The view exists as far as we can go back in the history of thought. The traditional view of truth. Absolute. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, don't go away. Because now if the two of you would like to field any questions, I think.
Oh yeah, question time, my favourite part.
Who'd like to start?
Mina.
Who'd like to start the grilling?
You have to stand up, do you?
No.
No, okay, I'm sitting down then.
Come on, guys, both of you.
Oh, he's killing our fun.
Okay, so, who'd like to kick it off?
Excellent.
So you said there's no truth, right? And could you be taking that statement out of context? Could they be saying there's no universal truth?
Yep.
Because I don't think
Exactly.
anyone is
Yes.
going to turn around and have this blanket statement of there is no truth. That wouldn't make sense to a 5-year-old. So for someone to be going with this and making it sort of fact, there is no truth, seems really illogical to me. So if I were to say there is no universal truth, that would make a lot more sense to me. I think that kind of fits in with the whole postmodernism. Because they're saying that what's true for me might not necessarily be true for you. And I think
Does
I
that include
agree
the
with
statement
them.
itself?
Sorry?
So does that include the statement itself? So you're absolutely right. I mean, they usually don't go with this simplistic
Yes.
idea, but they say there is no absolute truth.
Right. Because what's
But,
true for you is not necessarily what's true for me.
Yes.
If I have a vision of it saying it's true for me, it's not necessarily true to the person sitting next to me who can't see what I'm seeing.
Right. So then, is this statement absolutely true or not?
What do you mean?
Your statement.
So the statement, there is no absolute truth.
It could be.
Is that true or false?
Well, we don't. Can you prove it?
Well, sure.
One way or
it's-
another?
Yeah, because, I mean, at the end of the day, they sound like they're saying different things, but they actually collapse into this again. So,
Okay, so let's say that I said there is no universal truth.
okay.
And
So
so,
is it the
is
truth
that
that
statement true? For me, it is. It would be personal. It would be subjective, not objective.
But then, are you trying to say something about reality, or just stating your own opinion?
Like I said, it's subjective. So
it's
it's
your
not
own
something about
opinion.
reality. You can't take something that's subjective and make it an objective statement.
Okay, but then again, it says subjective, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't say anything about truth. It just says, or it doesn't say anything about reality. It says something about your view of reality.
So it's
Yes.
kind of like your
And at
personal
the
opinion.
end of the day, my view of reality is the only thing I know which makes it truth.
But does that mean there is no objective truth?
Sorry, can I so let's say, God forbid, I had terminal cancer and I was convinced I don't have cancer. So now that is true for me. Where would that sit in like the way you're viewing things?
Well, if you were coming from a medical opinion, your doctor would turn around and say, this man is...
That's true for him, but it's not true for me.
Exactly. But then there's a story of a man who died of hypothermia in a refrigerator that wasn't on. That was the truth for him, and it became reality because he believed it.
I'd like to find the reference for that. That sounds a bit odd, but it is possible. I mean, the power of the mind is sort of, and if that's what you mean, are you talking about then the power of the mind to kind of convince us of things and that sort of thing? But even that, you're not really rejecting that there is an absolute truth.
No, I believe there's absolute truth. I believe there is absolute truth, but I'm saying they still have a very strong argument.
I think, as I am, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the postmodernist is actually saying there is no absolute truth.
Yeah.
Okay, it's not just that we can't find it or we're limited in our ability to discover it. That actually it doesn't exist. It's not there at all. Is that how you understand it?
And this, there is no truth. What we're talking when we say truth in that context is absolute truth.
Okay.
We're saying it's like a truth that's true for everyone.
Yeah.
So it's like exactly. Something like that. Making our job pretty easy.
Short and dirty. Didn't Jesus kind of support many different methods and saying, and even St. Paul said that, every culture or every person will be judged on their own kind of culture. Isn't that kind of indication of an absolute truth for each person is different?
Do you want to take some? Okay, so two things. Number one, with this, we're not taking away all subjective truth. We're just saying that there are absolute truths. So subjective truths still exist. Cultural influences still exist. But on top of that, there are objective truths upon that. Like terminal cancer, it's going to be objectively true. Secondly, and this is just me analysing what we've said, so it could be completely wrong. When Jesus was saying this, just by the way you're describing it, I feel that he was... the fact that he's talking about salvation and being judgment for all would, number one, indicate an objective truth for everyone, regardless of their culture. And that subjectiveness that I talked before, like there are cultural influences that are different, like right on the left side of the roads, would be indicative of that part of the quote.
I might just add to what you're saying. I think it's possible also to think of it as, think of how our legal system works. Okay, so you have rules that say things like if you break the speed limit, you will be fined $300. Okay, and then you have other parts of the same system that say if there are extenuating circumstances, then the judge has the discretion to waive the $300. So does that mean that the rule about breaking the law is just subjective? No, it's just that it's a more complicated system. That sometimes when you look on the outside and you see the judge says, oh well, I don't know, you were worried about your wife having a baby and therefore, you broke the speed limit, I'll let you off. from the outside you could look at that and say, oh, that means that, you know, the rule isn't you know, true. It can just be broken and by anyone at any time. But in fact it's not, because he's following another rule kind of thing. And I think when God deals with us according to our circumstances, it's not that the commandments aren't binding, it's that there's one commandment called love and mercy and forgiveness that is also binding and sort of impacts on all the other commandments. And they're both kind of absolute commandments, they're both binding, if that makes sense.
Thanks.
So I think I need a point, I guess. I was going to say the sort of extension of this topic is maybe not exactly on topic, but the argument often extends to the different faiths and the same idea that there's no objective truth, there's no one true God, that everyone's God is the same, and the idea of, like, I feel like it's a similar topic, but maybe I don't see us coming to the same answer. So can we talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, that's a good question.
So there are different opinions, but would we be able to conclude that because there are different opinions, we can't really say that there's one absolute truth? Because this is the most basic. So this is one of the arguments for the postmodernists. He sees a lot of different opinions, and he says, well, what works for you, just works for you, and to each his own, right? To each his own, and the conclusion, I think, doesn't really follow that there's no absolute truth. So just because there are different opinions doesn't say anything about whether there is one absolute truth or not. At least that's how I see it. I don't know.
Does there have to be an absolute truth in every situation?
You mean moral situation or just reality?
Both.
I think there is always absolute moral.
So in an argument, there is always one person who's wrong. Always saying.
Well, it depends. I mean, two people differing about what flavour of ice cream they like the most. You can't really say there's an objective truth. Sure, I'll go with vanilla, but yeah. But yeah, I mean, two people having a difference over the flavour of ice cream, I will say no. Like, there's no absolute truth about whether vanilla ice cream is objectively better than chocolate ice cream, right? It's just to each his own. And this applies here actually. So I like vanilla ice cream, you like chocolate ice cream, we're both happy.
So I'm keen on Christianity, the next person's keen on Islam. They're both happy.
So is it the same as comparing ice cream?
Well,
Or are they?
Who defines what has no absolute truth and what has no absolute truth?
Because I think it's what corresponds to reality at the end of the day. So if I'm saying vanilla ice cream is better than chocolate ice cream, I'm including in the statement my personal preference, right? So this is with ice cream. But someone arguing for Islam, for example, would say, no, Islam just isn't true for me, it's the absolute truth.
Yeah,
It's the objective truth.
No, but the term of Islam is something totally different. The term of Islam is talking about the God. Ice cream is just a preference. So what's actually obtaining is what's how important is the truth is. That's what the term of Christianity and Islam. What's the preference? But it's totally different point.
Yeah. I'll just be a heretic for a moment, alright? Let's just say like Christianity is false. Like Jesus was just born, he wasn't born from a virgin, he was born like he was the son of a carpenter and he was just a human being and he never did any of those miracles, blah blah blah. And it's all been made up, What's your answer to that?
Well, can't we actually look at the evidence and see whether
Let's say
this is a valid...
scientific belief that we don't believe in anything supernatural, and it was just all made up, and the followers of Jesus made it up and made it like a nice story, and people just followed it, you know, and that's it. And there's no heaven or hell. There's just you die. That's it. And
But
that's it, you know.
Are you assuming that position though?
Yeah,
Before...
I'm saying that position. I'm taking that position as the truth, and I'm telling that you are, you know, you're a bunch of liars.
As the objective
I'm
truth?
just saying, yeah, that's the objective, my objective truth.
Okay.
How would you answer me?
But if you said they're a bunch of liars, then you're saying there is an objective
I'm just saying it's all been made up.
and they don't have it.
So are you saying
it's not like supernatural things. Why do you have to believe in them? It's just like I can understand this postmodernism scientific view of the world, and we shouldn't be questioning ourselves, because when did all these miracles happen? Like, did they all happen like back then? And now in the scientific age, we look for a miracle, we can't even find it. You know? Do you know what I'm trying to say? I'm trying to get at.
We have a few comments. Can we use the microphones on, because I think the people at the back don't hear what's happening. So maybe if we keep one on this side and one on that side, and just share them around.
I would say, I'll try to say, if you can't not believe in the supernatural, because belief itself is supernatural.
What do you mean?
So I can't say I don't believe in the supernatural, but like I believe there is nothing supernatural, because my belief itself is not tangible and within nature, within like tangible nature. Like that belief itself, that thought, like our thoughts are not natural. So I think that is like our own experience of our own intellect and our thoughts, I think in itself is an evidence of something outside of nature.
So, like our consciousness.
Our consciousness, yeah.
That's an interesting point. Yeah. I think Mina's going to say something. We have
Lots of Minas today. I just go back, a lot of this is language, guys, and it's very interesting. I mean, back to Veronica's point about when we were talking about religion, I noticed they were talking about ice cream flavours and then religion. And I think we kind of left off into the next topic, but I just wanted to make a little comment there, that if I said, I prefer Islam over Christianity, or if I prefer Christianity, then I might be able to relate the two using language. But I don't think that's what the comparison, like that we jump from, you know, my preference of something to...
It wasn't my preference, it was a statement that he made. He stated that one flavour was better than another. And so when you compare that to the statement of one faith being more accurate than another, I think they're on the same page. Had he said, I prefer vanilla ice cream over chocolate, or I think vanilla ice cream is better, then that's subjective.
I was just going to say that's still just a function of language. I think when I say that chocolate is better, I mean,
it's implied.
While I would argue with anyone,
the question is better for who?
Yeah. So ultimately, even though I haven't included those words and have used a very long statement, I think it's understood when I say that I am involved in this process of decision making using my powers of subjectivity, and to me, that's what I prefer. But a religion is making a comment about reality and about absolute truth. And if there are contradictory views, then you can't really have that true for you, true for me. Because they're all making statements that say that there is an absolute truth and this is what it is. So it's not that they're actually wishy-washy kind of, you can have this, I can have that. One's saying, no, if you believe this, then you're wrong. And the other one's saying that in a different way. So they can't work together, so that will kind of fall apart too. I'll just pass on to you.
Is there a mic?
You mentioned it.
I think one of the strongest statements in philosophical thought is the one made by René Descartes. I think therefore I am. I'm just interested to know how postmodernists would answer that question in terms of how would they argue that that's relative. that existence is relative.
Was he actually talking about absolute truth, or was he making a statement of...
No, so he wasn't.
What
So
can
Rene
we-
Descartes said, he said,
Yeah,
I think,
yeah.
therefore I am.
Yeah.
So if we say that that's absolute truth, how would a postmodernist argue that existence is not absolute?
Can I twist the words a little bit? So maybe if I extrapolate from what Rene Descartes was saying, was that the only thing that I can absolutely know is true is that I exist. So what would a postmodernist say to that?
We're not postmodernists, so...
But you exist because you believe you exist. It's true for you. It's reality for you alone.
But you may not.
Well, yeah, we might all be in this matrix.
There are actually, there are actually philosophers today who seriously say Descartes got it wrong, and we don't actually exist as we think we do. So there's a strain of thinking called illuminativism about the mind, which says that there is no real self. All you have is a brain doing all these kinds of functions, and basically that's it. And the self is just an illusion. Even more so though, like, I mean, Plato thought there was a soul at least. And like everybody up until recently thought, there's some kind of self. And actually even today, most people, I mean, these guys are like right on the fringe. Atheist philosophers and stuff, look at them and say, these guys don't know what they're talking about. So Daniel Dennett is the main sort of guy who pushes this line, and there's a few others. And I think it's kind of interesting because it's related to the whole, that thing there. It's kind of self-defeating as well. Because if the self is an illusion, who is being tricked by the illusion? There has to be a self that has this false belief in the self, if that makes sense. Yeah, that, like, if you have a computer and you program it to do the same things that a brain does, say, mostly, it won't have a self. It won't know that it exists. That's what we're going back to what Mina was talking about before. There's that additional dimension of our existence. So if there is no self, then there's nobody to be deluded. There's nobody to get it wrong. So it's kind of it's a nice little illustration of the principle implemented in that particular area.
So could you say what postmodernist? If we're saying that postmodernist says that it's not absolute that we actually exist and they're 100% sure of that in their own minds, then can we say, well, postmodernist, well, it doesn't really matter if you go and kill yourself or commit suicide because it's all relative anyway.
Can I say, I think that's what Nietzsche was wrestling with. I mean, I like Nietzsche because he was really honest. He got it. He got the fact that if you give up on God and if you give up on the idea that there's a reality and a truth and so on, then yeah, what's the difference? Why not just go and kill yourself? Why not have slaves? What difference is it going to make in the end? And I think that's one of the reasons. I think, as I understand it, postmodernism has really gone out of favour in the 21st century now. It's really, most people who seriously think about it reject it. And I think that's one of the reasons. They've realised it doesn't correspond to what we see around us.
Just a really quick comment, not even a question, but so you're probably right about professional people who think about this for a living, that most of them have regretted postmodernism. But I started a job recently at a Catholic university. So it's a Catholic university, right? But I've noticed that 80%, I'm not even exaggerating, it might be a little bit more, with the exception of the other 20% who aren't postmodernists, are the Catholic students. But the rest of the people, 80%, will answer textbook postmodern answers to any moral questions and religious questions. So if you ask them about whether something's right or wrong, even sometimes in extreme cases where you have a strong gut reaction about a murder or something like that, or to anything. The majority answer is always no, it's up to you, you kind of decide. So there's like most people are like really strong moral relativists, at least in this place. And when I asked the other people who work there about this, they kind of said, yeah, we noticed that it kind of became that over the last 5 years. That was what they said, I don't know, like they sort of noticed, at least in their classes, a kind of gradual shift to the point that now. So the only reason I mention it is that it's, even if it's kind of fading away amongst philosophers, this is really important because it's a very live idea, it's still swimming.
Just on that, what Sam's saying, maybe, I guess, philosophically it may become unsound, but I think that it is very alive in terms of the way people think, particularly about morals, about, moral relativism and, there's no absolute truth about morality and how people live their lives. Like, for example, Veronica said, you want to be a Muslim and it works for you, then that's just the way that you're going to do it. That's what I'm trying to stick there through, Jesus preaching. So how do you approach that? Because I don't think it's going to be very convincing to show much self-refuting argument overarching everything when really they're just passionate about letting everyone live their own life and have their own kind of morality instead of it being like a truth about having Panadol and rat poison. They're not going to see it like that. They'll just say that it's more about moral obligations and things like that.
Well, that's the danger, because postmodernism is a worldview. So it has to encompass your entire life for it to remain consistent. Anything less than that, and you're not being consistent in and of yourself. Like, one day I'm Christian, one day I'm Muslim, one day, you have to be, your own worldview has to be consistent in order from anything further to be consistent. So if we want to, society loves to box this with religion and very sensitive topics, because it's a very easy way of letting everyone go home smiling. It's just a very, whatever works for you, works for you. But nobody can live like that. A society built on postmodernism would be like a torturous one to live in. Rat poison in the morning, doctors prescribing you, whatever. It's not a function of reality. Nobody can really genuinely live this way. So it becomes kind of like a nice thing to have in the corner to bring out whenever a heated discussion comes out. That's kind of where it's most dangerous. So yeah, it's in the social mind, but hopefully with society moving more and more and you guys attending these meetings, we'll weed it out of society. Oh no, Mina, yeah. I don't know. As soon as you said that.
Postmodern view doesn't seem so, unpractical. It sort of breaks down everything to, trying to find the truth in everything, trying to break everything down to any medicine, trying to fix up the body with chemicals and so on. But looking at the Old Testament and New Testament, people react differently to things. People are more violent in the Old Testament versus the New Testament. But if Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, and there's the Trinity, then the God of the Old Testament also is the same God as the New Testament. And if you preach peace in the New Testament and some different laws in the Old Testament in terms of how, according to how society was, according to the culture that was there, then does that sort of our definition of truth then, is that just flawed because it's different for each culture and he's still thought in a postmodern sense by trying to make humanity as a whole better, and that was his truth really subjective, and if it is that the objective truth, and in that way are we just looking at truth in a really broad way?
I think this is the Old Testament.
Please feel free.
There's a microphone.
Okay, I don't trust myself to give a comprehensive enough answer.
I hope I'm going to answer your question. If I don't, please correct me, talking about that. I think many of us kind of hear about this, and there's something that kind of resonates, which is, I think it's not really the postmodernist rejection that there is absolute truth, but I think it's the idea that people should be free to make their own decisions. And I think they're two different things. Okay, so the postmodernist is kind of making a claim that there is no absolute truth, and that's why anyone can choose to do what they want. I think the Christian says, no, there is an absolute truth, but God in his love gave us free will so we can choose to do anything that we want. Okay? So it is possible to preserve that thing that resonates with us, that, if you're born in a different culture or a different time or whatever, of course different things are expected of you and etc. And that's true. But for us, there's still that underlying thing. So, things like, if I can use another medical example, so some people get into, what do they call it, the thing where you have little tiny traces of elements and they make you better?
Talking about trace elements, like in your body?
No, like you take
gold
minute amounts of things. Homeopathy, that's the word I'm looking for. Homeopathy, okay. So that's the idea, like if you take little tiny trace elements of gold or something or other, okay, and that'll fix up your diseases. Okay, now, the postmodernist, I think, would have to say on that if that works for you, that's fine, and maybe it goes back to Veronica's thing about, maybe the power of positive thinking and so on, okay. But I think the non-postmodernist, including the Christian, would say, no, there is actually a truth there. Like, either those things make you better, or they don't make you better. And this is a serious situation, because if you don't go to your doctor and get proper treatment, and instead go to your homeopathist, okay, and a lot of people have suffered a lot and died because they did that. And I think the fact that they did shows that regardless of what we think about things, there is actually a reality that's going to come back and bite you, sooner or later. It's like you can't avoid the law of gravity. You can convince yourself that you're flying and you're capable of flying. You can be totally 100% and it's totally true for you. But when you step off that ledge and flap your arms, the law of gravity is going to kick in, regardless of what you think. There is a truth there, okay? And it's going to have serious consequences. Okay? That doesn't stop the fact that placebo effect, okay? But that's also part of the absolute truth. Part of the absolute truth is the body is a really complicated mechanism, and that sometimes thinking things can change, physiological things in your body, biofeedback and all that sort of stuff. In no way does that take away the fact that there's an absolute truth. Now, you're saying about the Old Testament and the New Testament, so I'm not sure what you meant.
That people themselves were different, so they needed to go on different paths to reach a certain state.
Yeah.
That is God bringing us up according to our culture at the time, which is...
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I think, again, in one way, that's kind of subjective in the sense that God deals with different people in different ways. Okay, so he totally told off...
That's the objectiveness in that. That's the objectiveness that he deals with different people in different ways.
Yeah. Yeah, because, like when you go to the doctor, okay, the doctor will say to one patient who has a cough and a sneeze and so on, you don't need antibiotics. And the next patient with very similar symptoms, he may say to him, you do need antibiotics. Okay? Why? What's the difference? Well, maybe he examined them, and on one he found that there was an infection in the lungs, and he got worried about it. On the other one, he examined that there wasn't an infection in the lungs. From the outsider's point of view, it looks very subjective. It looks like just a whim. Why did you do that with one and not the other? But there's actually an underlying reality there that is absolute and doesn't depend on what we human beings think. So when God deals with people in different... And even you don't even have to go back to the Old Testament. Today you'll find two people living in the same house. God can teach one of them a really harsh lesson, and the other one who's doing horrible things, he just leaves them and doesn't do anything to them at all. Is that the whim of God? No, I think it's the love of God being applied to different people according to the circumstances. And so there is that absolute truth of what will work for a human being to make them better. It's just that what works for X is not going to be what works for Y. Is that the question you're asking?
Yeah.
Guys, you happy with that?
Yeah. Awesome. We'll keep the mic. Just keep it. Any more questions?
Can you explain the logic behind, the argument behind the existence of moral truths?
Existence of moral truths. Yeah. You want to click up together?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, so the existence of instead of using a negative argument, you mean? Because it's a negative argument, it's a flaw in their thinking. Would you like a pro point? Is what you're asking, or?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
So that's useful because he just said that they assume more moral cultivation.
Do you mind doing it in the microphone so you've got that?
Very quickly, I'll take a page out of. Oh, actually, no, I really shouldn't. Let me think. Try and be very not controversial.
We won't take it.
Yeah. You want to have? Go for it. No, because the one I have might be.
That's okay.
No, it's not okay. Wouldn't you have a good one? Ouch, man, ouch. I'm not.
No,
You have a
okay.
good.
Okay, there's just one thing I want to say about that. Okay, so when we're talking about morals, what is morality? So for a postmodernist, morality is just an opinion. Right? That's exactly what it is. It's how we've been raised up, it's how our culture functions. But then there's this sort of feeling for us that we want to impose what our culture, what we believe is our cultural opinion on everybody. So someone who grew up in Saudi Arabia thinks that killing Christians is moral. Okay? Someone grew up here, for example, sees that killing Christians is immoral. So you have different opinions for now. Okay? Just like two people can have different opinion on ice cream flavor. But I think what distinguishes the two is that for ice cream, if I like vanilla ice cream and you like chocolate ice cream, we both would agree that the best thing for everybody is that for me to have vanilla ice cream and for you to have chocolate ice cream. Right? That's the best thing for everybody. But with morality, we sort of have this sort of additional contingency or intuition that, everyone should believe that killing Christians is immoral. This will make the world a better place. The person in Saudi Arabia, he thinks everyone should believe that killing Christians is moral. Right? So this is not a matter of opinion anymore, because you're not just saying, this is just how I grew up, this is how I act. You're saying, this is my moral system, and it should apply to everybody. Does that make sense?
Yes, but how does that prove that?
How do we know that killing Christians is wrong? Why can't the Saudi Arabian be right?
Yes. Yes. So again, you have to end again at an absolute point of reference, right? So if we have different opinions now. We realise that the conflicting opinions aren't really just conflicting opinions, but there is an absolute truth of the fact, right? We want to actually know whether killing Christians is moral or immoral.
But why? How do you know that there is an absolute truth
In
that situation?
Because you want to impose your system of beliefs on others.
Wanting it to be true doesn't make it absolutely true.
But if you see that morality is just how you were brought up, why would you impose your culture on somebody else's culture?
But again, that's just a moral belief. So how can you argue that?
Well, remember when I talked about the problem of progress, I said things like women's rights, abolishment of racial discrimination, all these things wouldn't be morally better or worse than one another. So I'm going to take, I'm not 100% comfortable with this view, but I'll shout it anyway. But William Lane Craig, he puts down the objective moral values deep down in all of humanity, there is a certain level of objective moral truths. Sorry for the harsh imagery, but the example that I remember he gave was raping babies. Like, objectively, I think all of us would agree deep down that this is wrong. Or even to say that there's something like progress, to say that one moral standard is better than another, is to say that there is something which is correct, and to say that something is closer to that correctness than something else, which would kind of be inducive of an objective moral truth. Does that make sense?
So just because we believe that there are some morals better than others, I don't think that necessarily disproves that. So for example, if we were to say that there are many moral codes, I don't think that, so that assuming that all moral codes are equal, I don't think that's what you said is necessarily in conflict with that.
Why wouldn't it be?
Well, for example, we could imagine, pre-women's rights or whatever, or the abolishment of slavery. That was just the acceptable social behaviour at the time.
Yeah.
So it's no different now, it's just that society's changed now. And so the acceptable society, behaviour now is just different to that. It's not better or worse, it's just different. And so morality is just what society is happy to, accept behaviour-wise.
But is that what most people are claiming, though? I mean, I get from the term that they are saying that the moral system of today is better than what we had before.
Only because it's what we're happy with now. So it's better because society's changed and society's maybe progressed, but the moral system just reflects that. So back then,
you can't say society's progressed without saying morality has progressed.
Yeah.
Because that's what's progressed in society.
Well, it depends what you mean. I'm not saying that the moral system is better, I'm just saying the moral
You're saying as time has moved forward?
Is more suited to that society. The same way that there's different societies location-wise, there's different societies time-wise, and each morality is just appropriate for that society. And societies just try and make the moral system...
I think almost anyone, even a postmodernist, would say it is preferable for me, say, to not be in pain rather than for me to be in pain. Or for any human being, it is preferable not to be in pain rather than to be in pain.
Well, I don't know about the second one.
So, just to put it in a different light, so in the age we're living in now, there's this way that of homosexuality, so it's okay and it's correct. So I agree with you. Who's to say this is better or worse than it was before? Where's the moral stance on that? So everyone's accepting of it, and more and more people are becoming more accepting of this. Even though us as Christians, we say no, it's wrong, and that's how we got up, and that's the moral that we have. But obviously, there are Christians out there that are still saying, no, it's okay. So in this stage, who's to say if this moral coming through is better or worse than what we have now? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
I like to play. When I want to go,
It's not necessarily about pain.
I'm just going to go. I don't have a fully fledged dancer. Like, what if you got something? No.
I'll go after.
I'm just going to say that just kind of my style is I like to play at the extremes. Like, if you play at the extremes and everything becomes very clear and very obvious of what's the truth, what kind of, what's the reality of the situation. Whilst if we play in the grey area, I feel like it becomes like language and semantical and kind of, not as clear as it could be. So I'm not talking about every single situation, saying that society in every single aspect has improved forward. I'm saying things like, moral abominations, as we call them now, have been abolished slowly over time, would be conducive of improvement. And by improvement, there is this standard in which we hold that, we don't grasp yet, to say that this is closer to it than what we had before, if that makes sense. So getting into grey area examples, I don't know, just, I wonder if you'd like to add anything.
Yeah, look, homosexuality is a difficult one because it's a really complex issue. And I think sometimes some sections of the Christian community oversimplify it. And I think that's probably not a good approach because you're not really getting to the truth of the matter there. There are real human beings involved here, often with very good intentions and so on. And I think sometimes we don't really take that into account. We just have this blanket, it's bad, you're going to hell, that's it. That's probably not a Christian way to do it. So
the only comparison I can think here is saying, so before slavery, it was acceptable in society, and now we look at it and say, oh gosh, I cannot believe that this is what society was doing. So it's the same scenario here, where we've gone from homosexuality is not a good thing, that when we look back and say, oh, can't believe that they didn't accept it when it becomes easy to accept it. So you're saying there has to be, when you were saying before, that for something to be better than something else, you must be relating to something at the top that can really correctness. So I guess that's where the moral issue lies. I mean, my belief in it, your belief, and like you were saying, what works for you, works for you. But yeah, it's just...
But what you're describing is also consistent with what the guys have been saying, in the sense that when we accepted slavery, it may have been that we hadn't yet understood what the truth is. We were still in ignorance kind of thing. And it makes sense that over time and experience and so on, we learn and we get closer to the truth. And that's how I would see slavery. I think today most people would say slavery is bad because everybody is valuable, everybody is precious. That's kind of something that I think people didn't have before. Samy was always telling us about the pagans and stuff like that, and how, in the pagan world, this idea that everybody is equal and valuable just didn't exist, It was the way the world is structured is there are people who are important and there are people who are just possessions and fodder to be used and to be killed whenever you want. I think there was an example he gave once about some guy who was murdered by his slave. And so as punishment, they not only executed the slave who committed the murder, but the other 400 slaves that belonged to the guy, just to make the point to all the other slaves, this is what happens if you murder your master. And they felt perfectly justified in doing that, killing 400 innocent people, because they're right down on the ladder. It's like slaughtering cattle or something like that. So that's something where I think most people would say we have progressed. And if you had a time machine and could go back to Roman times and could sit there and explain it to them, what's the difference between you and your slave? You're both human beings, etc. Particularly as Christians, we would say you're both the image of God, and so on. So in a sense then, there is an absolute truth, and it's just that the inferior moral system hadn't understood that truth as well as the superior moral system, if that makes sense. And I don't know how that's going to play out in homosexuality, that needs a whole night to itself, I think.
But has the world really changed, not better? Isn't it still has some of those things?
Do we need to have a black and white answer, like either it's better or it's worse? I think in some things, definitely, the world is a lot better. In some things, definitely it's a lot worse. I think we have to kind of distinguish and kind of work out what is better and what is worse.
So, are we still wasting time?
Yeah, we're okay.
Yeah, we've got a bit of time.
I still don't think we've kind of resolved this issue that morality can just be whatever's best for society at the time. So we think that them killing 400 slaves is a bad thing, but that's only because we have a belief in human equality, human rights, value of human life. But I mean, an atheist certainly would say that human life is not really it's like I say, it's a machine, it's an animal, and really the priority, I guess, is just the self. And I think certainly in society these days, that's really, I guess, the main driver for morality is making sure that I'm okay. So rules like don't kill is because I don't want to be killed, so I'm on the side of people that can just go around killing people. So things like that, and I think that's why, I've heard this argument that, society's morals is just trying to suit what people want, the society that they want to live in, for their own reasons, not because so much they care about other people. And it's a very pessimistic, selfish way to look at it, but that could be the argument that that's just the society they lived in at the time. That's, the morality was fine. We just want to have this morality in our society nowadays. It's kind of like people looking after themselves.
Mina wants to respond to you. Were you raising your hand?
I say that Jake.
Yeah, Jacob.
In terms of the argument that William Lane Craig puts forward, and I think he appeals to our moral experience in that argument, that we should perceive our moral experience as much as we perceive our sight or our hearing or our sense of touch, that our sense of morality and right and wrong we should interpret with as much weight as our eyesight or our other senses. And then he gives these horrendous examples, and he appeals to the fact that obviously we have an idea that a sense that one thing can be morally superior to another, and based on that experience we can say that there is such thing absolutely as right and wrong, and it's not a social construct based on.
I think someone could argue that a lot of that is just based on our evolutionary instincts. So we try and take, as humans or any other animal, we try and look after our young. And so for them to be killed or harmed is a natural instinct for us, in a moral sense, but that's wrong. We need to try and protect them.
Yeah, I think that's true. A lot of people do argue that, but I think there are a lot of examples you can give that don't support survival of the species, like executing the disabled or things like that don't have any evolutionary benefit or survival of the species, but we would still experience as wrong.
But that's only now. Like, for example, Spartans would kill any deformed baby, but now, like I said, that's stemming from our kind of sense of human worth, that that human life has value, and so like the American Constitution, all men are created equal.
So is that claiming an absolute truth that all humans are equal and valuable, or would you say that that's not?
I think it's used as a convenience that I want to live in a society where everyone is treated equally because I want to be treated equally.
But that doesn't.
So even if it's disabled, I don't want people, just because I might be disabled in the future, I don't want to be killed. I don't want to be executed if I become disabled.
What about
kids disabled?
What about things like me putting myself in harm to protect somebody else? It doesn't have to be somebody I care about, but there are many examples, I'm sure we can look them all up, of people saving random strangers from a car, running them over, or etc., etc. So evolutionary doesn't.
I'm not saying everything's explained evolutionary.
Yeah, but it doesn't gel with that. Like, if it's not true for all, then that explanation, you need other things to.
Yeah, I agree. But I'm just saying that in the end, there's reasons for our morality, either because of survival of the species, some evolutionary instinct, I want to survive, so we make generic rules for everyone to make sure that each person is confident that they're going to be safe in society, and that's the society they want to live in. Sorry, I'm being a little devil's advocate.
No, it's making us think really hard here. I think you could only really be a postmodernist if you believed in, there is no God. Or if you believe there is a God, but he's totally, he has nothing to do with the world, totally. Because if all there is in the world is just atoms and energy bouncing around, and that's all that there is, it is actually really hard to justify any kind of moral truth. I'm not talking about now absolute truth about facts about the world. We're talking about moral truth now. So if that's all there is, why should there be any morals? That makes sense, kind of thing. And I think the reason that the Christian believes that there are absolute morals stems from the belief, a particular belief about what God is like, that God himself is good. And God, the creator of the world, being good, therefore that's what kind of endows our universe with moral good and evil. That's subjective. And that's where it stems from. That's what it's founded in. That's the foundation of saying something is good or evil. So basically, something is good if, this is probably too simplistic, something is good if it accords with the nature of God, it's in harmony with the nature of God, and something is evil if it's not in harmony with the nature of God. I don't know, I'm just making that up. And if that's the case though, then you definitely do have absolute moral truths, and that's, our job then is to discover them. And it kind of would work even better in the sense that just as there's a physical reality that you can't escape from, and things will work, like for example, a human being will continue to live if they don't drink poison, and they won't continue to live if they do drink poison. Okay? So there are consequences. And I think that's the idea behind objective morality that we think of. It's not so much about a God who's just there to punish you because you got cranky, got out of the wrong side of bed or something like that. There are consequences. If you live your life in certain ways, things go badly. They become out of harmony with reality and with how God made us to be. And if you live your life in other ways, then they're in harmony and things work well and you are fulfilled, etc., etc. If that makes sense. Sorry.
Never done this before, but I may disagree with you.
Oh, it happens all the time.
Were you sort of, what I understood from what you said is that objective, like having a worldview of objective moral values existing requires an awareness of God.
I think so, yeah. How else would you do it?
So I would think that even without an awareness of God, you have this moral experience that should lead you to objective morality, existence of objective morals.
So let me clarify. Thank you. So let me clarify. I'm not saying that you have to be aware of God to follow an objective morality. I think God has to exist for there to be an objective morality. And you may not be aware of it. And I've known a lot of atheists personally who are probably more moral than most Christians that I know, even though they don't believe in God. But it's because they picked up on the reality itself without acknowledging the God who's the foundation.
So, objective morals can't exist without God.
Yeah.
But you can know that there are objective morals and values without knowing that there is a God.
Yeah, just as you can know the law of gravity.
Yeah. No, I don't disagree with you.
Okay. Are there any other questions, or shall we call it a night? Nothing pressing?
Let's call it.
Okay. So, thank you all. That was really, really good. I love that discussion. And the presentation was very nice. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mina and Jamie. So, we're getting close to the end of the year. I think we only have 2 meetings left to the end of the year. I'm pretty sure we have one in December as well, don't we? I think we do. Yeah, I think we do. Okay, Mina's just quickly looking up because we've all forgotten. Anyone remember what the next one's about?
The Fall?
The Fall?
Is it the Fall?
Is it the Fall? We think it's the Fall. So it's about, what does it mean that Adam and Eve fell? What does it actually mean? What is sin and what is the fall? That's it. And we do have one in December as well, which will be about the difference between the approach to theology in the East and in the West, which will be a really interesting one as well. Next month, in November, what is the fall? What are its consequences? What is its nature? Stuff like that. So it should be a very interesting meeting. We'll look forward to it. And we look forward to seeing you all. Shall we stand up and pray? And then I believe there are snakes at the back. For those of people who are standing. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, my God, amen. Hear us, O Lord, as we pray, saying, Our Father,
who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. and lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Through Jesus Christ our Lord, thine is the kingdom, power, and glory.
See if you can work out whether the sheep's so objective.